professionals within the various dimensions of wellness. So let's kick burnout to the curb for good.
Join Terry and George for Dimensions. Fridays at...
They say how I getting old, you'll think I is messing sala. I sure I ain't getting cold, still hot like a Congo pepper. I still could perform and function, I could handle any action, with satisfaction still guarantee. Who disagree? They telling lie on me, you see. I tell you, age is just a number, controlled by your state of mind. Maturity is always better, especially if you're feeling fine. Believe me, age is just a number. The golden years can be defined. Is after 68 is over, you could really enjoy 69.
All right, everybody, good afternoon to you, and we welcome you all to New Era TT Radio. And this is our Drive Time Exchange. Yeah, this is where we enter into bold discussions, and none other and no better than our journalist extraordinaire, Tony Fraser. Tony, good afternoon to you.
Good afternoon to you, Charlo. And I like your selection. It's a very provocative piece for this afternoon's program.
Yes. According to what you're dealing with, I try to find the music to go along with it.
Wonderful. And you're right. We are, if you like, reflecting on the past to go forward. Some bright spark had talked about history being more in the present than the past. And one of C.L.R. James's books talks about the future in the past. I think that's the title of it. What we want to do is move away a little bit, Charles, today from the usual news and current affairs hard stuff into looking at the past and looking at the lives of people who lived in the past but are very much in the present today. And I think that can be of some useful instruction to us. Sometimes we wish, I remember Reggie Dumas launching a program in which he said, let's start over again. We went wrong sometime along the way, and we should start back and start with a clean slate. We are not exactly doing that, but we have assembled a group of people here who could tell us about their experiences of the past and what they learned from the past in the present. And perhaps out of all of that, Kalaloo is a good way to put it, some kind of understanding of ourselves in the present can work out. I know that's a kind of complicated something, but we will attempt to make sense of it this afternoon. And we have assembled 4 persons. A couple of them are well-known public figures and who can look back at their own past and give us some direction from that. Rona Batiste, who has been with us for some time now. Rona, open the camera on yourself so we can see you. We have a man called Frank Clark. Rona is a well-known public figure, teacher, publicist, co-editor, assistant editor, whatever the official title was, with her husband, Owen Batiste. Rona also was a teacher. She had some wonderful, I am sure, experiences in China. She and Owen spent quite some time in China, and she will also inform us about that. Hello, Rona, how are you?
Hi, Tony, I'm fine. I don't know whether you're seeing me.
I seen you loud and clear, man, and you have on a young people thing there. I seen that too.
I keep trying, boy, like you.
We have a man called Frank Clark, Dr. Frank Clark, who is an international relations expert, retired from teaching and research. Well, I shouldn't say researching. I'm sure that he's still researching. People like that don't stop researching. Frank, you are there?
He's muted.
Not hearing. Is he there, Charlo?
Yes, he is. He is.
Okay. Frank, open up. Let's see you on camera.
Yeah, he's muted, and he's so Mr. Frank, you need to unmute your microphone and open up your camera so we could get you within the scope of the Zoom platform. Mr. Frank, are you there? Tony, we have to, maybe he's just stepped out.
Okay. Peter Morales, who again, I hope he's there. Peter, are you there?
No, Peter hasn't arrived
He
as
hasn't
yet.
come in just yet. And Nasser Khan, who is the youth of the seniors. A good way to put that. Nasser, I'm sure that you are there. We
Well,
have some reluctant seniors this afternoon.
Yeah.
Nasser Khan.
Actually, happened. What we have Frank, we have Rona, and we have Rona. I have two Batiste.
We have two Runas.
Yes.
Well, there's only one Runa that I know about.
Yeah.
So she's there on the screen now,
I
always
think
seeing her.
I'm mixed up there with the typos and everything else. So please feel free to erase any of the two Batis.
Yeah.
I'm fine with that.
All right. So, Chalo, let's start.
Yeah.
Let's start on those who are here will come in, and those who are not here, hopefully they will get in at some point in time. So, who we have here, Chalo?
Right.
Let
So
me
we have
understand
Rona
I can-
here, and we have Frank.
Frank. Okay.
yeah, but
Frank, let's hear your voice. Frank, are you there?
Frank, is muted, and he's on the inside, but he's muted and his camera is off. So I don't know if he probably just stepped away from his phone or laptop, but he's on his iPhone. So
All right. So let's start with who we have. We have Rona Batiste, and you heard the introduction I gave to you, Rona. Rona was a teacher herself. In fact, she reminded me earlier today that she taught my wife a series of convent people. That's a good place to start, Rona.
yeah,
We have
I think Frank is there now. Frank, are you there with us?
I'm seeing somebody
Right,
else. That
so-
looks like Frank.
Yes, Frank.
Yes, it's Frank.
Right. You're there?
Yes, I am here.
Right. So perhaps you need to get your camera a little bit closer to you because you're kind of far from it and a little bit fuzzy. So do some adjustments and come up. Right. That's more like it. Wonderful. Wonderful. I don't know if you heard my introduction, but I won't go over it. But essentially, we're looking to the experiences of people like yourself as to what were they in the first instance and how can they guide or lend something to the civilization of the period. And in the chat, we will discern some of that and we'll probably ask some questions around that. But essentially, we want to hear from you more than you want to hear from me. So let's start with Rona. Rona, you lived a life as a teacher before you taught. Tell us something about your teen years, where you grew up, what the experiences were in your time, and how you coped with situations in the period of time.
Well, I don't want to bore, especially the younger listeners, if there are any of them, with the good old days. And I was thinking that the good old days really and truly, we tend to glamorize them and to make others, especially the younger people, believe that the lives they're living now are certainly nothing compared with ours. And then I take a step back and really examine, well, are we really that different? I mean, when we were teenagers from what the young teenagers at present are? And the answer really is no, we are not that different. Now, yeah, so times have changed and the culture has presented us with an evolution. What I'm seeing now as I look back is that we are doing okay. I think we elders tend to panic too much, but we are doing okay because what we're seeing is a natural evolution. So yeah, when I was growing up in Tunapuna with the Kendalls and the, oh my God, the Hossains and the whole bunch of people, the Thorpes and so many other names that I can call, those were sort of halcyon days. You know, we tend to make them the days of innocence, where we can walk the streets without fear, Main Road or Back Street, Freeling Street, Fairley Street, without fear, as compared with today. And but we must understand that the young people, many of them, in certainly our class, if you want to call it the middle or rising middle class today, they don't need to walk. You know, they drive. So the two experiences are really quite different and quite unique. So I am not going to rail about how wonderful our times were, but yeah, to us, they are great innocent memories. And you can talk to any of us. I'm sure Frank would be able to testify to this because he married one of my cousins, a first cousin at that, Diana Hunt. So he would be able to testify as to those days. But yeah, I think we shouldn't panic as elders, but really accept the fact that life changes and it is a natural evolution that we have to take in its stride. Over to you, Frank.
Donna, you said something that triggered another question in my mind. You talked about the Hossains. Tunapuna is a place of a lot of blends, ethnic blends. I don't know what people of African descent were called in that time, whether it was African or whatever. What of did people live together in a place like Tunapuna with all kinds of people living there, Indians, Africans, in between, Douglas, like myself, Douglas, like yourself also, different kind of Douglas, and so on. Did people live in harmony without conflict? Of course, if you put the most innocent people together in 10s and 20s, there will be conflict. But there is a lot of sense of conflict today amongst groups of people who may look different from each other.
Well, I've always referred to Tunapuna, and by the way, I mean, there were other melting pots along that east-west corridor, and indeed towards the Southlands, where you had a blend, I call it a crucible, in which there was a blending of so many cultures. And it was happening for the first time in this place with this particular blend of peoples. And because it was, I keep using the word evolution because it was a starting point. Remember, before us, the real first peoples were the indigenous peoples, and they were eradicated. I was thinking today you can hardly find a genuine, full-blooded indigenous person among us. But nevertheless, what happened as a result of history and the results of that history was that you had pockets of people, not only ethnic and therefore racial mixes living side by side, each with and bringing a particular culture from whichever lands they came from, but for the mere sheer purpose of survival, we lived in harmony. Of course, we had differences. And these differences, you know, really magnified with the coming into place of present day politics. I mean, it's a retrogressive step rather than a progressive move to that blending. So yeah, the blending was unbelievably pure and innocent. So that we had families from different parts of the world beginning to consider them transplants. And this would be like your grandparents, transplanted from another part of the world, totally opposite to ours, or to what we call ours now, and having to blend and mix, and that we did. And this is what I'm saying. We cannot allow ourselves to be negative because we are blending that beautiful one people. One of these days it will come about that we really don't have Africans and Indians, and we would all be the product of that blend in that crucible that was the village like Tunapuna.
What
So
is
you-
your particular
Yes,
what
huh?
is your particular ethnic blend? Viewers can look at you, Rona, and see that you are here, there, and everywhere. So what is
Well,
that blend?
you know, that calls for another program, another day of discussion, because I've always thought, especially in coming through the ranks of age and cultural stages, that, you know, there is an absence of highlighting the mixed person who is really the true product of the arrivals. And it's going to happen one day because little by little and more, we're going to see the miscegenation of people and the mixing of these bloods. So I did a DNA test, as did Simon, my son. And what came up was the alarming link, genetic link, to just about all the countries of the world. And the African link, which I would believe is the heaviest dose in that crucible, that dose was balanced by a whole mix, a potpourri of other blood.
So
So,
you
I mean,
mix up all over the place.
yeah, this is
Yeah.
so many of us.
What, Rona? What was your maiden name?
Hunt, Hunte.
Hunt. Okay,
Uh-huh.
that's a kind of neutral something. It doesn't tell us. It's Dugala in itself. So yeah, we can't discern anything from that.
It's neither African nor Indian nor what. At least my
Something.
mother's maiden name was a clear Scots name because her grandfather was a Scotsman, fairly from
All right.
Scotland. So you could trace that directly. But then he actually married an African woman with just a single name like Bodo. And that gave rise to a whole new generation of mulattoes.
Okay.
Because they stayed black, white. And well, history and culture took it from there. I mean, you know, all kinds of other bloods came in after that. But
all right, let's move on to Frank. Frank Clark. Frank, you're here and you're hearing us loud and clear, yes?
Yes, I'm here.
All right, good. Chalu, do we have anybody else in the waiting room?
No, not as yet. I'm monitoring it for you. So as they come in, I will let you know.
I will slip you the phone numbers of them to call them and wake them up. They
No.
should be here.
No problem. No problem.
When I have a moment, I'll send you the phone numbers. Frank Clark,
yeah.
welcome to the program.
Thank you.
You've heard Rona's introduction, and I go along the same lines as I did with Rona. First, tell us where you were from and what was the experience like in your youth, from as far back as you remember into your teenage years, and about the surroundings and the people in the surroundings and how people gelled or did not gel, and how they interacted with each other. Frank Clark.
Yes,
ahead,
Tony.
Frank. Yeah.
Let me make one correction. In introducing me, you introduced me as Dr. Frank Clark. I am not Dr. Frank Clark.
You're just Frank Clark.
Just Frank Clark.
Okay.
I did the PhD degree at the University of Pittsburgh, but I returned home before I wrote the thesis. and came back and ended up teaching. But it's interesting that, so that I'm not to be called a Dr. Clark, even though the Latin for teacher, or the word for a teacher in Latin is, I teach docere. So really a doctor is a teacher.
Right, so we will stick with Frank. We will stick with Frank. Tell us about your youth and your the environment in which you grew up, and something about that period, even your own ethnic combination. You know, nearly every tree you scratch, you find something else from some place and so on. So tell us about that.
Let me see. I am told that I was born at the Port of Spain Colonial Hospital in 1933, that is. Well, and I've spent all my life here in Trinidad, except when I went abroad for a while. However, I am tempted to make a comment on Rona having introduced me as having married one of her cousins, Diana Hunt, who passed away 2 years ago. Now, I have never met Diana's husband. That is Rona's uncle, I think, is it? Rona?
Yeah, Diana's father.
Yes.
Diana's uncle. Yeah, my father was.
It's interesting.
Yes, that's it.
That I gathered that. Well, I said I never met Errol Hunt.
Errol, your father.
Who was the wicketkeeper for the West Indies.
Right.
In the 1930s. Now, when I saw photographs of Errol Hunt, I took him for a dougler, only to be told that apparent Indian strain that he seemed to carry, I was told by his daughter Diana that he is really an Amerindian.
Yeah.
So I gather that he is First People. Of course, I always heckle Diana and say that the First People that the Caribs, I gather, someone has told me that I look as though I have some First People in me. But well, I told them that consider me Arawak, who were almost wiped out and so on and so forth. But I just mentioned that to show this interesting link between these two guests you have here this evening, Rona and myself. Because what Rona didn't tell you is that she is the family's historian and has traveled far and wide looking for links. So, right, so that I'm talking to two people so far that I admire for the work that you're doing, Rona, and of course you, Tony, because as I've told you, I have admired you as a journalist from way, way back when. Right, so let me try to answer the question you're trying to elicit from me. I started by saying that I was born in Port of Spain, but I found myself at age 4 being taken to live in the village of Brasso on a cocoa estate with my father-in-law, so that the very first school I went to was Brasso RC School. That was an era in which it was said that the most backward village in Trinidad was Brasso. And that if you are from Brasso, you were called a Brasso Mook. So that I have the privilege of also having been a Brasso Mook. Well, of course, I've lived on an extension of a cocoa estate in Mamoral, so that you have Brasso and Mamoral as part of my country experience. But then during the war, my father-in-law abandoned his cocoa estate to work with the Americans at Wallafield. And he moved to Flanagan Town to have a closer commute to Wallafield, so that I also lived in Flanagan Town. Now Flanagan Town then, and maybe up to now, it was 65% East Indian at the time, to the extent that I was there when India became independent. And all of us in Flanagan Town, regardless of whether you were Indian, Coco Payol, or whatever, we sang the Indian national anthem and knew all the words and the music. In fact, at that age, I hardly knew the difference between being what I am and being Indian or Coco Payol. Right, so that gives you a sense of, so Flanagan Town, in fact, the very first song that I ever learned to sing was an Indian song called Ahupide Satalu Bapritam. Now that gives you a sense of what has happened in that era. We moved around. Now, having said what I've said, what was the other part of the question you were asking, Tony?
So what was life like in that period of time, away from big towns and cities? What was the rural life like? You talk about interaction amongst your peers at that point in time. Give us a sense of that. And also life in a rural village at that point in time. What were the facilities like? How did you make out, etc.?
Let me confess that the period that I spent in Brasso and Mamoral and even Flanagan Town, I was quite young. So that, I went to school at Brasso RC, and then I went to the Flanagan Town Roman Catholic school, which was, the church was used as a school at the time. But I was merely a little fellow in the village and in the school, so that in terms of interacting as a member of the community, I was quite young at the time. That only happened after my mother and father-in-law decided that they did not want me to grow up as a country bookie. So they made a decision.
Frank, how was a country bookie looked upon at that point in time? When you came to the city, I don't know if you came to the city often, if at all.
Yes, in fact, I at age 10 or thereabouts, that decision was made to ship me out of the Brasso Memorial situation, and I was sent to live with a grandmother in Anna Street, Woodbrook.
You became a tomboy.
In fact, so I went from horse and cart to trolley bus. And most importantly, I went to the St. Crispin EC School. Now, that experience was interesting in terms of moving from the deep country to one of the better, so to speak, arranged parts of the Port of Spain. So that, what can I say in terms of, so that, in fact, when to answer your question, when I arrived at Anna Street in Woodbrook as a 10-year-old, I had already started speaking like a Coco Payol.
So Frank, it was like country bookie come to town when you reach in Woodbrook then?
Up to a point.
Did fellas give you party and thing as a country bookie?
The children around me, the children who heard me speak, they mentioned to each other, they said, listen to how he's talking, listen to how he's talking.
Your language must have been different and accent must have been different.
Yes.
All right, go ahead.
You know, I don't even know anything about the Spanish in the country. They make an attempt to speak English very properly because they said, they don't say, give me my thing, they said, give me my thing. So that it was an interesting situation that when I got to Woodbrook and I used the my instead of me, they found that I was speaking like people from speaking like a Coco Payol. But very, very quickly, of course, that I fell in line with speaking like the boys in Woodbrook.
Frank, can you tell us where that Brasso is?
I beg your pardon?
Can you tell us where your Brasso is? Because we know of a Brasso Seco, which is a different Coco Payol village about 8 miles north of Arima. But your Brasso was in south, wasn't it?
No, my Brasso, the train stop for my Brasso was Brasso Piedra. Brasso
Where was that?
And a South Central.
Central. Brasso Piedra was the stop where you got off and you walked to the Cocoa Estate. However, that Brasso was on the Rio Claro line because, in fact.
All right, so you're in Woodbrook now.
Yes, I'm in Woodbrook.
Country boy come to town.
That's right.
What kind of schools you went to in town? What was the educational development as you came into Port of Spain?
Well, shortly, when I was at St. Crispin, I was found to be, well, I was quite small. Of course, I've always been small in body, but I was also a bit young so that I could not get onto the cricket team of the school because I didn't have the physical build among the big boys. And by good fortune, as far as I'm concerned, my grandmother, at whom I was staying, was encouraged by my godmother to send me to a school in Woodford Street. That was the Gaines Normal AME school. So that I was taken from St. Crispin and sent to Gaines Normal AME school.
Yeah, I know the school.
Yes, the manager of that school, who was married to my godmother, was Reverend Dr. William Mayhew, who is father of the Trinidad history. Now, but more importantly, when I went to the Gaines Normal AME school, I found the headmaster had just arrived also, and he was Harold Theodore Carrington. Interestingly, I found myself with a headmaster, Harold Theodore Carrington, who in fact is the father of Dr. Lawrence Carrington and Trevor Carrington, the late. But here I was being taught by a headmaster who had committed himself to being a teacher to the extent that although he never went to any elevated teacher's institution, he became a teacher by correspondence courses. And he was able, as a primary school teacher, to have to get the qualification of, he was Harold Carrington, LCP.
Yeah.
He was a
So Frank, you moved on to, let's move on to your secondary school life, and tell us about the interaction of you, a country boy from the country in town. What was the interaction like when you went on to secondary school and interacted with boys your age, and how you moved through the school? Give me your background from the country.
When I went very quickly, I became hard to distinguish between my 10 years in the country and my coming into, in fact, as I told you, I was born in Woodbrook because my grandmother at the time of my birth at the Port of Spain General Colonial Hospital, she was living at Gattaca Street. So when I was born, my parents were living at Gattaca Street, Woodbrook. So it's a return to Woodbrook to my grandmother and so on.
As the people say, your neighbor string, Berry and Woodbrook, right?
Right, so that...
Your secondary school life, and how was it? How was the interaction amongst boys in that period? Or did you go to a boy and girls school, which was kind of popular in that period of time?
Well, when I left St. Crispin and went to Gaines Normal, I remained at Gaines Normal almost forever.
Okay.
Because it was an era, as you might know, when there was no age limit. You could have remained in school as long as you wanted to.
Okay.
So that what happened, therefore, is that I remained and went through 7th standard at Gaines Normal on 2 occasions, because it is just that if you wanted to stay, you stay. And it's when I was looking as though I want, because I enjoyed my school life at Gaines Normal with Harold Carrington. I became, in other words, a town boy, in a broad sense.
You get some status here.
That distinction that I know you're trying to make a distinction, but my being a country boy was lost within a year of having to arrive back in Woodbrook. Mm-hmm. So that what really is part of the story is that when I appeared to be wanting to because one of the things that Harold Carrington did is that while he used the Nelson's West Indian Reader, he also used the Royal Readers, which was very important in terms of one's understanding and command of language. and literature. But part of that process is that I had to be almost pushed out of Gaines Normal when one of the teachers said, "Boy, tell your grandmother to send you to a high school." In those days, you had a lot of high schools started by individuals. Clarence Burke. You had also Arthur Murray. You had Hamilton Holder.
Progressive.
No, Hamilton Holder had progressive, and Arthur Murray had Osmond High School. So I found myself becoming a student at Osmond High School. Right, so that...
Where was the school at that point in time?
At the time when I started going to Osmond, it was on Charlotte Street.
What part of Charlotte Street?
It was between Henry and Charlotte Street. It was a large property with a big mango tree, and there was a vacant building, and Mr. Murray rented that and had his first Osmond High School, which was a mixed school of girls and boys, before eventually he separated girls from boys.
Okay, so Frank, tell us about the life at that period of time, not only in school, but generally. What was life like? What were the interactions of people, young and old? How was it? Cordial, not cordial, hostile, integrative? What was it like?
People who lived, in fact, what I didn't say is that part of my living in Port of Spain, I also lived at St. Joseph Road, which is east of the Dry River.
Where's St. Joseph Road?
I beg your pardon?
Mm-hmm.
That is east of the Dry River, St. Joseph Road.
Right.
That's within a short distance from Plaisance and Laventil and John John.
Mm-hmm.
So that I had the experience of being exposed to life behind the bridge.
Right, and what was it like?
Well, it was a period when steel bands were just emerging.
Mm-hmm.
I lived at one of the apartments at the 29th St. Joseph Road. Those apartments.
Is that 29 Port of Spain?
I
What the
didn't
Calypsonian
say
song about?
I did not want to
the Calypsonian,
Yeah.
the Calypsonian was having fun.
We go catch up and go see you. Where your name again?
Tony, just spot on.
Right.
That's
But
right. That
no,
was a notorious
that's right.
name given to that area. But it was mixed. This is the thing. I mean, you had all the different classes and social groups living there at the time comfortably.
Frank, I remember at a later point in time, Vasco da Gama Bar at the corner of Old St. Joseph Road and St. Paul Street. Remember that?
That's
What
right.
you
Right.
Mhm.
In
Go
fact,
ahead, tell us about the life. Tell us about the life in that area.
there was a lot of group warfare between fellows on St. Joseph Road and fellows further up in Plaisance Road. So that, interestingly, in the barrack yard at number 29 St. Joseph Road, one of the bands that emerged was in the backyard was Johannesburg Fascinators.
Mm-hmm.
That was led and organized by Winston Spree Simon. And my mother complained that Spree's making too much noise in the back there. Now, but the fellows up the hill and the fellows down in St. Joseph Road, they would have they would have fights among themselves. So that I recalled one of the generals from the Lower St. Joseph Road, whenever they were going to have a rumble, he would pass and tell people living on St. Joseph Road, shut your windows. Because you might have heard that some call themselves the Desperados and others the Marabuntas.
Marabuntas, yes, yes.
Right. Well, I was a little fellow there at the time, because what happened is that my father-in-law's father, who came to Trinidad in in the late 1880s from Hong Kong, China.
Yeah.
He went and was working as an overseer on a cocoa estate in Brasso.
Frank, you keep saying father-in-law. Do you mean to say your stepfather?
That is really my birth father and my mother came to a parting of the ways when I was about 3 or 4. And she gave me the gift of a father-in-law, because she his name was Edward Apping. He was the grandson of a Chinese immigrant to Trinidad in the 1890s, whose son she married. Not married. They never got married.
So Frank, you have all kind of mixed-up blood inside of you. You touched on an important issue a while ago, that when the Bajans fighting each other, there was an indication to the non-Bajan citizens that close up your window. So in other words, the Bajans, the fighters who were fighting each other, did not impact on those outside of the gangs. Is that so?
Yeah, they tried to protect you from the missiles that they were pelting.
Right. Do you remember any of the Bajan, the names of the Bajans of that period?
Well, the fellow used to tell you to shut the window. He was mainly known as Nugget.
Okay.
I think because of the color of his skin, there was a Nugget shoe polish that had, they call him Nugget as a result of that.
Right. So,
but what I find memorable is that the fellows who were considered to be Bajans, they felt that was a badge of honor.
mm-hmm.
So that on one occasion, the fellows up in the John area send a threatening letter to the fellows down in St. Joseph Road. Unfortunately, they left out the name of a fellow who thought himself to be one of the senior Bajans in St. Joseph Road. And he sent up a letter asking why did they leave him out.
What was his name?
Actually, would you believe that I remember a Bajan from Woodbrook called Stanley Hunt from Invaders,
yes.
but I can't remember the name of the Bajan from let me see, from my area. No, I don't recall the name, because as a little fellow,
Right.
And later on, as I grew, got a little older,
Right.
I got involved in, you see, I shifted between St. Joseph Road and Anna Street, so that I used St. Joseph Road as a base when I was going to Osborne up to a point and so on.
Yeah.
So that
So Frank, you moved between the social classes. The old St. Joseph Road, the John area was the lower, black class, and you're talking about the brown skin middle class in Woodbrook. You're moving around plenty.
Tony, let me jump inside to let you know that we have Peter there, right? He's
All
on.
right.
He's on the phone.
Okay, wonderful.
I think I've given you a sense of what happened in terms of my being born in this country.
Wonderful. And we appreciate it.
Yes.
What I want to welcome now, one other person, a man called Peter Morales, who was from a different part of the city, Port of Spain, St. Vincent Street. And he told me some time ago that he was a man around town with a steel band. He must have encountered some Bajans from the St. Vincent Street area also. Peter, how are you?
Yeah, well, I'm hearing you.
Right,
and I
you're inside, right?
I have been laughing at what the gentleman was saying because he's a lucky guy. In those days, they had Bajans. And nowadays, we don't have Bajans, we have gunslingers.
That's right.
So who were the Bajans in the St. Vincent Street area in your time?
Well, we didn't really have many Bajans in those days. We had some fellas like Exy and next door to the Casablanca Cafe where my father had his little business. We had a steel band and all kind of people. The only time I came across real Bajans was like carnival time. Like for instance, you would hear the Red Army Bajon coming down and down by Globe.
Where was Red Army from?
Well, they come from the back, maybe from Lavantil or some place like that. And, it was a steel band and all that sort of thing. And when they reach Globe by Globe Theatre, they are usually on a carnival Monday morning. It's only a lot of bottle and stone they're pelting all over the place. I saw that with my own two eyes.
Mm-hmm. What was the steel band from St. Vincent Street at that period in time?
They had a steel band next door to the Casablanca Cafe. That was the only steel band that existed in St. Vincent Street at the time. And, every evening I think they would play almost the same song. But that was how it was. That was, in St. Vincent Street between Park Street and Oxford Street. But I am not too familiar with Bajans. I went to Fatima College. We had little fights, as schoolboys. But in my younger days, there were not many Bajans from my area. And later on in my life, after I moved from St. Vincent Street to Oxford Street, which was near to the steps, sort of thing. But it was relatively a peaceful environment. I really don't.
The Oxford Street that you talk about is way up to the east, before the steps.
Yes, you have steps. Yeah, you have steps. I used to go up the steps with my mother the last Friday in every month because we used to go up to the church up there. Right, for prayers and things like that in those days. Well, I ain't going up there now, there are too much, Bajan now,
They have some real Bajan up there now.
Well, I ain't going there, no. No matter how much money you're giving me, I'm not going up there at all.
Peter, I understand that that's the area that Stokely Carmichael grew up in before he migrated to the U.S. Did you know him at all? Was he in your period of time?
No, I didn't know him. I had a friend living in that area. He's dead now, the Gonzalez family. They were high up in Observatory Street. I used to go up there. In those days, this would be in the 50s and 60s. I think the area was reasonably peaceful. But today, now, it is a totally different story. The boy days in my time, those days are totally different to what exists today. It is as far as
What were the boy days of your time?
what we had as boy days, man, is totally different to what the boys and girls today are doing. In my days, we would have fun, taking a stick and pushing a bicycle rim from Oxford Street to St. Vincent Street, in a contest. Right? We would pitch marbles in Lord Harris Square. I would fly kite in the savannah. I would pitch stop at the corner of Frederick and Oxford Street by Rodriguez Grocery. All of those things, I would fly kite on top of the roof in my house, and the fellas would come down and try to see if they could cut my threads. We had a lot of fun. In fact, nobody ran more jockey in Oxford Street than me. And whenever the rain fall, it was only jockey race in Oxford Street. We had fun, real fun. Today, it looks as though pitching marbles is a pastime. Nobody is pitching marbles again, Tony.
Peter, they have video and thing now. The children inside lock up watching video.
They're pitching marble on computer. But that could never be the same thing. In those days, you put a ring on, everybody put the marbles in, and if a fella put in a Chinese marble, which was called a cow, well, everybody gone mad, everybody gone behind that. Then another fella would come there with an iron marble, iron doodle is what they call it. And when he threw that in the ring, all the marbles would scatter. We had fun. We would run around Lord Harris Square several times a week and have running races. I would ride from Port of Spain to Perseverance Club in the back of Marabal to take up a bath in the swimming pool up there. You can't do that again. There's traffic all over the place. These days, you want me to tell you the honest truth? The honest truth is that those days in my time, they were the greatest days that we have ever had in this country. I have to admit that we were poor, and poverty does not really mean unhappiness, because you can be poor, but you can live happily. And that is how
Peter, just let me ask you a question here about being poor. The others don't know you and can't see you, but I know you and know what you look like. And I know, I did an interview once with, I won't call the person name, somebody we call a white boy. And he told me the same kind of story. And I said, well, I didn't know white people was poor. How you could be saying that?
Well, to be honest with you, I have to admit there was a certain amount of discrimination in my time, because I have experienced discrimination, and it hurt. As a young person, I would be liming a friend, I would have friends who were of a white color, but when they have their birthday parties, they would only have white people. But this boy who used to run jockey in Oxford Street, they didn't want me around. So I would be outside the party and seeing the party inside, and I was never invited. And it felt bad. It hurt. Because
I thought, looking at you, Peter, I thought you would pass and get into the party.
No, and I'm a meek fellow. I ain't going to go where I'm not wanted. I would be crazy to do something like that. But there was discrimination. In fact, this discrimination was evident in Trinidad. Dr. Williams, he made that very clear to us. The banks would only employ people of a certain class, and he put an end to that. But that was...
Peter, are you saying if somebody were to look at you, they would say that, well, you could pass the test. So was it social class?
As a white boy?
Sorry?
I would pass the test as a white boy?
Yeah, so I am asking if there was a social class element into it also.
Well, my answer to that is you could pass your test, but if you want, bring a tin of black meat, because I might be fair on the outside, but I'm black inside. Because I grew up in a black environment, and my heart is full towards the black people in this country. I say it frankly, and I say it in front of anybody.
Right. So, Peter, we have Rona Batiste here. And Rona, I am sure, as Frank said, as the historian amongst us, is angling to get inside there and chat with Peter about his experiences. And so too, Frank. Go ahead, Rona.
Whoa.
Oh, thanks a lot. Well, let me say that as the conversation and the dialogue expanded, what I would like to share is a memory of Tunapuna and our Bajans. And I want to mention the fact that we had our own Mastife, and there's some blood family linkage somewhere there through my mother. So Mastife, watch him. And then
Did you say, Rona, did you say Mastife?
I said Mastife.
Wow,
And
wow,
there's a
wow.
linkage between my mother's side and her cousin's side, and Mastife is a derivative. So
Right.
we have some strong warrior blood out there.
Tell our audience who may not know of Mastife, meet me down by Ikweze.
And Kotalka, he was a real bad boy.
Yeah. Tell
He
us
was a
who
red man
Mastife was.
and he arose out of Tanapuna and the environs therein, and he became notorious, I suppose, because he certainly defended his people, whoever they may be. And there was another one I wanted to mention, Bachak. Now, Bachak lived, you could say, by the Bulldog Bar, which was on the Eastern Main Road, and which was owned by a man of Portuguese descent, I suppose. But Bachak, when you see we were playing mass with our immediate family, like Lauren and Lennox Hunt and all of them, and I was just a little teenager, well, wanting to go along with them. On that main road, Bachak would keep close to our line of masqueraders. Well, at nighttime, we would come out when the steel bands were ready to go home. And he would say, if any of all you touch my people, in other words, he was protecting us because we were his people. So they were Bad Johns only very often in name. And then there was Dalgo, this big towering red man like Hulk up on the Eastern Main Road opposite Alexander Pharmacy. And he was...
Sorry, Rona. I like the expression. Some people might not understand it. Red man. Tell us what a red man was in them days.
Red man is a Shabin, or a red-skinned, light-skinned man with clear African blood in him. But he's not an albino, mind you. It just happens that he's very light-skinned, or she. And this person is called a red man or a red woman, right? And to qualify to be one or the other, you have to have a sufficient amount of absence of the melanin in your skin. So Dalgo was a red man, and he came from a prominent family, I mean, they were the heads up on the Eastern Main Road, as I said, opposite Alexander Pharmacy. So, yeah, we had our own share. But I'd like to say something about the stratification of these villages and community groups, such as Frank mentioned, whether in Brasso or whether in Woodbrook or whether on St. Joseph Road. There was this classification of a historic emergence of first Black people. Firstly, the Africans who were emancipated and were standing on their own feet, and they gave rise to some notables in Tunapuna that I feel that I must mention. And among these notables were like the Springer family, sisters who went into music and really gave many of us young people a head start into the world of piano music, violin. They were reputable teachers. Springers and the Warners were such families. You had people like, Larry Constantine, Bess, APT James. I mean, all these people come from roots of Tunapuna, which was typical or symbolic of the villages that were rising. And they were educated according to the European system. And that explains the royal readers and Frank's mention of being in 7th standard, but being as scholarly scholarly mind as the present day university people. Some of them, well, let's not go there. I don't want to bad talk the quality of education today. But I just feel that another program could just spend time talking about the people who were the foundation of this evolving culture of ours before the other cultures started to kick in. I didn't even mention Miss Waddle, she was a pretty kind of white, like Morales, I suppose, background. And she went and started our carnival in New York. So, I mean, the number of the other musician, her name slips me now. She's the pianist, the famous pianist, came from right there among us in Trinidad. Exactly. So we can just go on and on with highlighting the foundation of Black people as a start in this development or evolution of our present multicultural society. It's beautiful.
Peter, you have anything to say there about your own upbringing? You said that you went to Fatima.
I would like to say something. I ain't no white man, I am a brown-skinned fella, right? I enough sunburn in my life. I am no longer a white man. White people that have freckles on the skin. My skin clear, right? But she said a few things that rang a bell with me. Particularly the culture we had in those days, the type of music that existed, In those days, the steel pan was not as dominant as it is today. In those days, it was 3 or 4 people in a gallery with a violin, the viola, even a piano and a flute, and they would make very nice music. That type of music from the old days. Unfortunately, we don't hear too much of it today, right? Opposite the Casablanca Cafe in St. Vincent Street, where I lived in my early years. There were some guys on the opposite side.
Peter, sorry, before you go on, the Casablanca Cafe, where exactly was it on St. Vincent Street?
The Casablanca Cafe was at the bottom end of St. Vincent Street before Park Street on the left-hand side. It was the home of the hot dog and hamburger in the country. My father sold hot dogs to make a living. It was just at the bottom part before you reach at the corner where, Traggery Road ends, Green Corners on the right-hand side. Casablanca Cafe
there was a big barrack yard somewhere around there, I think.
Yeah, that is the barrack yard where the steel band music used to come from.
Okay.
Right?
What was the band up there? Up in the yard?
I can't remember the name. It wasn't a big band. If I remember during the conversation, I will try and remember the name. But they played the music. Their people were simple in those days. We lived simple lives, happy lives. There was not really much disturbance. In the Casablanca Cafe, Eric Williams used to come to my father's cafe and buy his hot dogs very regularly, for instance. Johnny O'Halloran and Jane Miles were my father's good friends, and they would come there sometimes in the night and sit down with him and they would chat. Those were the experiences, in those days.
Peter, I remember as a schoolboy passing in the area, there used to be a small fella right at the corner of Park and St. Vincent. And he was talking to himself and Bajan talk and cussing and so on. Is my memory good? I don't remember what his name was, if I ever knew his name. Character of the area.
Well, I can't remember all, but I know in my time there were characters, real characters, we have, I think it was the mighty Popo. I think he was the guy who used to say, cold ice, hot ice, ice in your ice. He used to pass in his cat. It may be Popo and not short. We had a young girl that everybody used to call Mary Jackass. I don't know why. Right? Those were the days when if your mattress, when you see the mattress on your bed get slack, a man would come in your house. By the way, they had another fellow would come and sharpen your knives and scissors. He would go sharpening knives and scissors. Then the mattress man would come and take your coconut mattress down, cut it open, and with 2 gobber sticks, he would beat out the fiber, and then restock it, sew it, and take it, and you get a brand new mattress like that. That was the day.
I remember seeing a man beating fiber. I didn't know too much about it.
They would come and they would ask how your mattress is doing and things like that.
And he was quite clinical. And the sticks were swaying all around in the yard.
Yeah. They're good. They're really good. When they finish, they're leaving one spear fiber thread on the ground. Everything goes back in the sack, and you sew it back up. And boy, when you lie down on that mattress, you're good. It was good. It was good for your spine. Today now we get in sponge thing with a lot of advertisements, that this one better than that one and that one. We didn't have those classifications in our time.
You didn't get stuck in your back with some of the pieces of fiber, which probably didn't beat up properly?
No. Well, if you don't beat the fiber properly, what you will have is it would not be beaten out, and then you would have hard pieces where over the years the fibers stick together. But if I would beat out all those nuts in the fiber, they were experts, That is another dying art. There are a lot of other things that have gone, Tony. The windmill man by the savannah. People don't even know what is the name of the windmill culture. It is called Pilkili, and people don't even know that. They have a lot of things in our history that the young people today don't know. They don't even know of the good people. They don't know about George Cabral. They don't know about Albert Gomes. They don't know anything.
Who were those two people you talk about? Albert Gomes and George Cabral.
Yeah, George Cabral was the mayor of Port of Spain in the 40s. He used to have his office in Charlotte Street by where the bakery is.
Okay. So, Rona and Frank, join in the discussion. Don't wait for me. Chat with Peter, interact with him, ask him thing, tell him thing. Go ahead.
Well, I will answer any question anybody who, to the best of my ability.
Go ahead, Rona.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I would like to ask my other guest speakers what they really think about the future based upon the kind of period of innocence that we came out from. Do you think there's any hope for the future generations to survive as well as we did? Because we certainly did, eh?
Yes, we had the best times. That is a subjective opinion, which young people today might not agree with. But I will tell you the honest truth. I saw an advertisement in the papers this week that there's a coming set in the Queen's Park Savannah. And you know what the name of it is? Stink and Dirty. Now, I am not upset if young people like Stink and Dirty, But you see, I know it's a free world we live in, and everybody they do their own thing. One is they don't interfere with me and my style of life. So it's a free country we live and people could do. But I have to say, as a senior person, because I am not a young person anymore, that I would firmly say that I think our attitude to life has changed so vastly that it makes me wonder from time to time, where are we going? What is going to happen to the people? What are the standards? In fact, I don't want to go into politics because I detest the politics. But I ask myself, what is the national congruence? As a nation, what as a people do we want for ourselves? Those are questions that come to my mind, because it seems to me that the only thing that the people like today, the young people, is party.
Well, it has been our psyche. I mean, that is the happiness. If we could bottle it
Yes,
and
but
sell
if
it,
you
we
see,
could sell
if you
it.
see the number of applications to the Environmental Management Authority, every week you are seeing a multitude of applications for parties. And I ask myself, where is all that money coming from? Is it that some promoter is making billions and people are maybe they are not smart enough to know that? I will tell you, when I was a boy and I played football in the savannah, we had one football, and I used to go to the shoemaker by Lord Harris Square and borrow his needle to sew the football when it got torn, and then rub it with a kind of a Vaseline called dubbing to be able to go back and play. Today,
Yeah,
today
listen,
now,
we
when I
can.
pass by a football field, I see 25 footballs. My days was only one for a bunch of us.
I've given this a lot of thought. I've just turned 87. My days are numbered, and I am saying, well, did I waste a whole lifetime? Like 8 decades trying to make things better. And what do we have? And you know what? Maybe it's age kicking in. I'm mellowing with age. But my thinking is we are evolving. This is a period of extreme materialism after a period of extreme, internalizing with religion and discipline. So it's going
I used to go to church. My mother made sure that I go to church every Sunday in my time. Every Sunday and take communion.
Let's hear what Frank has to say about all that has been said by Peter and Rona. Frank?
Well, I'd like Peter to know that I have always been an admirer of Fatima College.
Oh, that is where I went.
Well, of course, it was before my time. Actually, I remember the very first day that Fatima College took in their first group of students.
What
I was
year
in
was that?
Anna Street, and I've looked at the evolution of Fatima College. One of the things I liked about the college at that time is that they had a very strong music tradition. In fact, they had a boys' choir on stage that.
The music man, Father Cochran.
Right, so that's, and I think a lot of the boys who went to Fatima, they came over with an appreciation of music at all levels. And some, of course, were emerged as vocalists.
Yeah,
right.
It was more vocal than instrumental in those days. But I went to Fatima College. I went there in I think it was 1952 or around 1952. I got my senior Cambridge when I reached 1955, 56, somewhere around there. And those were the great days. I remember all the names of the prefects and the priests that was running the college: Father Cochran, Father Ryan, Father Fitzgerald, even Clive Panton. In those days, he was a prefect. He was studying for the priesthood, until he probably met, a very pretty girl and decided he ain't going on that road. Poor fella, he was a nice guy. I played cricket with him for many years.
I think Clive Bradley, talking about musicians, I think Clive went to Fatima also in that era. Am I correct?
Well, I know of no musicians in Fatima College in my time. Father Cochran asked me to come up in his office, and he asked me if I could sing. And I got so cold feet. I got cold sweat, and I tell him I can't make that, and I done with that. right? But in those days, Fatima College is not as developed as it is. I was there when the wing by Driver was built. That was built in my time. But the football and the cricket fields on the other side of the road, cows used to be grazing there, and they would dump their stuff on the grass. And if you're playing football and a man skid you, you had to watch yourself because you're ending up in all the cow dung. Those were the days. Those were the best days in Fatima. It was nice.
Were there some American barracks somewhere further along west in that area from the school?
No, not that I know of. American barracks.
As if in my mind somewhere.
Well, yes, Tony, I can help in that regard.
Yes.
Because during the war, when the Americans started landing in Trinidad to build a base at Chaguaramas, a lot of soldiers came as part of that activity. In fact, Anna Street was one of the main courses to take them from the docks along Wrightson Road, Anna Street, Tragorage Road, heading to Chaguaramas. But what is interesting is that the American authorities also had black soldiers as part of the soldiers landing in Trinidad. And what they did is to create an area exclusively for black soldiers, and that was located on Mucurapo Road. So that was the army activity that was on Mucurapo Road.
Yeah, I have in my mind seen those wooden they're almost like sheds along that course road, that Mucurapo Road, going further west. It's something in my mind, just like on the western side of which was Marine Square. At that point in time, there were similar kind of shacks that I remember. Am I correct? Am I fooling myself in my memory? I must have been a very small boy at that point in time.
Yes.
Well, I can't remember anything like that, to be honest with you all. To be honest, I can't remember anything. The only barracks I know was in Oxford Street, where I think Penny Commission lived. Yeah, they had a lot of these little... they had a large barracks property separated, but the dwellings were separated by walls. We had something like barracks in Tragorage Road just before you reach Green Corner. In St. Vincent Street, I think we had something that looked like barracks opposite what's the name of they had a restaurant in St. Vincent Street. Yeah, just at the top before Oxford Street. Kimling was the name of the restaurant, if my memory is correct. And that is where Exie and those bad boys used to live. But that is all I know about barracks. I don't know of any
Peter, did you go to some 12:30 shows at Globe, which was quite close by to all of that in that period?
Well, yes, in those days we never called it cinemas, we called it theaters. We had several theaters. We had Globe, Deluxe Theater, we had Empire Theater. It got burned down. Empire Theater got burned down around 1950-51. I was there when I saw the fire. I started Empire, Globe. We had Pyramid. We had Olympic Theater in Belmont. We had Rialto down in Calgary, down in Western Main Road. Yeah, we had plenty of theaters. Those were the days when people had nothing else to do but go to theater as a pastime.
What I remember? You know what I remember? This would have been in the 50s when I used to board at the Bartholomew's, Dr. Bartholomew's people, by the Independence Square Cathedral. I remember shortish, stocky, native, well, we call them Amerindians, but those native people, actually coming from the mainland, South American mainland, with bows and arrows on their back, dressed in their little skirts. I remember that. It's like
Okay.
a dream now, but I bet you don't know that.
Yeah,
Well,
interesting.
talking about the theaters, the only thing that was very good about the Loose Theater where Antique, we had the Antique show on Saturdays.
That's
We
right.
had this fella who would have a show
That's
too.
right. That's
Sam Gani. Right? All these people are no longer alive.
Yeah.
But
Where was the
local
Antique show
talent on
held
parade.
at that
That
time?
is with what his name is. He died some time ago. He was a culture volunteer. I remember his name, but we had people involved in Parang, trying to push the Parang and really catch the nenen in trying to promote the Parang in those days.
Peter, where you pull that one from, boy? Catch the nenen.
You ever heard that before?
He got it from Trini Talk.
Yeah, well, that was an expression we used to use when you was catching your nenen.
What about Peter? What about down Duke Street, Slipway and whatever? There was a bay around there that little fellas used to go.
Slipway was down at the end of Ryson Road, right? There was a big pumping station there, right? And down in Ryson Road, where the TNTech effluent was going into the sea, we used to call it hot and cold, because you could go there and take a bath, and in one moment the water hot, and the next moment it cold. And there was a swimming pool there. I don't know if it is still there. We used to call it Benbow. That is where I learned to swim.
All right, so we are talking with some people, giving us their experiences of the past, and amongst those persons, well, all of them, we have Rhoda Batiste, we have Frank Clark, and we have Peter Morales. We were supposed to get a man from Success Village, Nasser Khan, but I don't know what happened. He didn't join us. But Rona spent some time in China. She and her husband, Owen Batiste, everybody knows about Owen, the famous journalist.
The Express.
Rona, I tried to get a job in the Express when I just came out of university, and I met Owen. Boy, I ran out of that building, but that's another story. Give us, Rona, give us a sense of your experience in China. How long you were there for, and the kinds of things that you engaged in.
Tony, that is for another radio show, TV show, talk show, because China, 12 years in China, was an experience that we cannot write enough books about, we cannot give enough speeches and talks about, because it was totally revolutionary for a thinker weaned and brought up in the Western culture. Remember, we prayed for these people because they were barbarians, right? And later on, Tiananmen Square was become a big international bogey. And then we go to China and find that these people are not only humble, but they're intelligent people. And they are people with soul. And people who, while they were pirating all our Western music, came to fall in love with all that Western music. So that is where I learned and got to love all those hits, musical hits of the 80s, especially, that they were just selling, practically giving away on the street corners. But China, Tony, really, that is too intense and too deep, and too broad in scope to deal with in this particular session. So maybe you could ask me a particular question about China.
Yeah, the productivity of the people of the country. If you go back 50 years or so, China, compared to Western standards, was a backward country. And at the present time, it's really the manufacturing capital of the world and producing all kinds of things. They have President Trump going crazy with his tariffs and so on. Good. So the industry of the people, the discipline and that kind of thing. Tell us something about that.
Well, very quickly, Peter, is it Peter Morales?
Yes,
Yes.
dear.
Yeah, I know the name. I know the name. I can't see you, but I know the name.
I didn't know I was so popular, but go ahead.
Yeah, I know the name Peter. Don't worry. And Peter is a popular name. But yeah, don't give up hope with our future, because I really see it as something that is going to have to correct itself. But I
Well,
was taking some notes in preparing for this get together of thoughts, and I have noted that one of the biggest markers, most impressive points to me anyway, and Owen, as we got up on a morning on that college campus where we taught English to teachers from the rural districts who would then go back to fulfill the promise of the communist platform that all of China must be speaking English by the next so many years. Every morning, those students would have to tumble out of their beds, go to the big playing field, and take and pay allegiance to that flag and to their national anthem, in other words, to their country. So we're beginning with nationalism and pride in that nationalism. The second thing they did, they had to do for about half an hour, was rigid exercising. So now my Patrick Watson, I keep making reference to him because he stimulates a lot of thought in my mind. Could show beautiful pictures of, look at the China and their military people, beautiful young military women, precision. That could come only through discipline.
Well, you know, Rhoda, if I have to say something, the only fat Chinese I have ever seen in the world happen to be the Chinese living in Trinidad. When I look at the TV and see the people in China, all of them are slim, healthy looking.
But that is diet too. I mean, and that is a historic thing when they had to eat bush, right?
Well, if you talk about their eating, these days, I saw on YouTube last week.
So it's a dietary thing, and they stayed with it. It became generational. They don't
but they
overeat.
eat everything now, you know. They eat scorpion, they eat cockroach, they eat. I saw them.
Absolutely, because the name of the game was survival, and the day we have no more oil,
well, we have the cockroach show. But I saw on the television, on YouTube, 2 days ago.
Yes. The day the electricity goes, that when the day the grid breaks down internationally, you watch it. I don't want to sound like a witch of doom and gloom. The day the electrical grid of this entire planet breaks down.
Did you ever see the movie called The Day the Earth Stood Still?
Exactly. Bamba Yagasiam, as the old people would say.
That was a movie with a movie star called Michael Rennie. When people from another planet came here and indicated that we have to straighten ourselves, and they didn't believe that what he could do. And he said, "I will give you an example where we could demonstrate that we could get rid of this planet." And they said, and what he did, he pressed a button in his spaceship, and there was no electricity on the planet for 1 hour at midday. It shut down the whole world.
Rona, I want to go back to what you said, because I think shining out of what you said for me was this business of discipline.
Discipline.
How was that introduced? How was it put into the culture of the people of China, or is it a historic thing going back? China is a very old society. How did that discipline enter the society?
Let me just hinge discipline, tolerance, and they're very tolerant, they're very patient people, these Chinese. And when you add the two of them, production follows naturally. So that explains that. So the question you want me to answer now is what? Just repeat that. Please.
That sense of discipline about the society you're talking about, people getting up and exercising, etc., etc.
I got it. Now, that is a historic thing that goes back to centuries when these people were feudal lords, they had emperors, and they were, so it was the very size of the population forced a kind of not only unrest and incivility and therefore civil wars, but for centuries, this was the pattern of their lives. I guess it was the pattern of many of the lives of many cultures too. But coming out of that into modern times, beginning in Mao Zedong, when he realized that, look, if we're going to grow, we have to band our bellies and bells and eat out of one bowl. So the one bowl, the one rice bowl culture was enforced and had to be enforced if they were going to survive. And out of that generated a system of governance in which the whole spirit of sharing and communism and naturally socialism was born. Now, it serves them well because I keep saying, Tony, I dare any country in this world with 1.6 plus billion people to impose the ideal of our democracy on that population. It's impossible. And so the Chinese I don't even think they ever thought of democracy other than to call what they now have as social democracy. They have adjusted it to suit them. But really, without that overriding Communist Party discipline, China could not have crossed that threshold from the 1900s to the 2000s to into this new 21st century. They could not have done it. The day they got into the World Trade Organization, they've been working at that for years, but they have patience, they have tolerance. And when they did so, that was all that was needed. I think that is where the change in prosperity and dominance of finances kicked in. I think if the West had realized that, it would never have given them WTO.
Right. Let me ask Frank. Frank, it may be that outside of China, in the quote unquote free world, it is a price that has been paid, according to the argument, that you give up your freedom to a centralized power and a centralized culture, and you lose yourself. So it's a matter of the discipline and the production and all of that, as opposed to freedom, Western style.
You're quite right, Tony.
Yes, you're coming into Peter.
Yeah, but I want to say what Tony said is very correct.
All right, but let Frank say what he has to say,
all right,
then we'll come to you, Peter.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Frank.
Very early in my hearing about China as a little child, there was a notion that China was the yellow peril.
Go ahead.
Yes, so that concept of China being a threat to the West emerged. But as Rona says, it is difficult to conceive of governing a country of such a large population. So that an understanding of how China has done it and is doing it is something that all students of international relations should seriously try to understand without starting at the level of ideology. We have to try to understand human survival. And China apparently has been finding a way to survive in terms of their own peculiarities. But I think it is worth considering how they move from being the yellow peril to now being at least the expression is that they have now emerged as a second superpower, an emerging superpower.
That's right.
Right. So that
I think they're causing President Trump some sleepless nights. Actually.
Trump already studied them. Go ahead. Trump studying to get
Go ahead, Peter, your turn now. Yes, Peter, you were saying something a moment ago.
Well, you know, the growth of China and the development of the country can be considered to be something of a miraculous nature, and it has all been due to the fact that, you know, when you're down out and you can't go lower than the bottom of the ladder, there's only one way to go, and that is up. And when Chinese people were working 364 days a year in the rice fields or whatnot, American or the West was having a good time. And the West, in my opinion, they have been caught napping, right? And once they had their hamburgers and the Big Mac and the Kentucky and all of them be obese. Look at the Chinese. They are obese people in China, right? And that is a reflection of two countries with two different approaches, two different characteristics, two different attitudes to life, right? And I know what Trump is trying to do, but it's too late to cry. China is too far ahead of the United States right now. Trump is trying to become the world's greatest dealer. He likes deals. But no deals are going to help the United States because the culture there is totally different to what they have in China. China, I have to admit that, I said before, but I think by Ms. Batiste, life is about change. Evolution is a form of human existence, and there will come a time when other nations might surpass China. But China, as far as I have seen, is the number one nation on this planet, and Trump can't do that.
Now is their time.
We're now coming back now to Trinidad. What can we take from the Chinese culture you experienced there? We are in a difficult condition in Trinidad and Tobago, and indeed in the Caribbean, all of the Caribbean, the English, French, Dutch-speaking Caribbean, we're in the same kind of difficult basket. What are some of the things that you experienced in China which could assist us here in the Caribbean?
Well, my mantra has been originally women, getting women to a position of feeling equally worthy as our men to take power. And thank God I've lived to see that come to pass. The other mantra I have been pushing, and I do this very humbly with my daily postings on Facebook. I have no idea how many people it gets to, but it certainly doesn't compare with the kind of platform that I was able to share in the news media, the print media in particular before. But to come back to what I have learned from China, it is their oneness of purpose, their oneness of destiny, their oneness of appreciating their history and with all the good, bad, and the ugly that came with it. And the bottom line is the oneness as a proud people. And therefore, I mean, before I die, I mean, I wish I could see right here in our Trinidad and Tobago a growing, a bigging up of self with pride of not only self, but country. Because that is where the oneness will begin. We fool ourselves and saying, oh yes, my child marry this race and therefore we mix up. No. The mix and go is more than that because we are still indulging ourselves in the discrimination based on money, wealth. So it doesn't matter what color or race you are. Once you got that money, you got the power. But to save, therefore, Trinidad and Tobago, it has to come down to a recognition that could only come with self-knowledge. Education apparently isn't the only thing. It has to come from something like God within one. to understand that it is up to me as a lucky human being, a blessed human being, to make this place a better place.
Do you think, Rona, that the population of China, and I'm assuming I've never been to China, the homogeneous nature of the population in China assists with that sense of oneness that the country has been able to achieve,
The
notwithstanding the
homogeneity.
fact of 1.4 billion people?
Oh, absolutely. The fact that they all look alike, they're one family, they can't run and hide from that. Even if you have 1% Chinese in you can't run and hide, and you're proudly Chinese. That is a binding glue already for them. Here in our little crucible, it is the total opposite. We have specks of every race and more or less in us. We can't claim to be African or in East Indian or Portuguese or whatever the heck. Don't talk about the Europeans. They've been, just about miscegenated. So you have to come back to that difficulty for us to compare ourselves with China, because China.
Did you sense, Rona?
Uh-huh.
Because I never asked you the question. When you and Owen decided to go to China to teach English, that desire to import persons to teach them a foreign language, that's one question. And who, in fact, paid for it? But that's a minor question. The major question, which you can answer: did you sense while in China there's such a thing as a Chinese philosophy? Is there a philosophical dimension that holds China together, or is it a mixture of philosophies?
Sure, Peter, nobody, and I want to thank him publicly now for being probably the only person who has ever approached Owen or myself to actually share the 12 years of our Chinese experience. We've written it, yes, but I don't know who reads. But anyway, to come back to that. So thank you, Peter. It will take a lot more than just this little slot to share with you the multifaceted reasons why we landed up in China. Remember, we'd gone into an electronic pioneering business with touchscreen computers that cost a mint. We ended up losing our family assets, and therefore jobless or about to go into bankruptcy. We got invited to China because the Chinese embassy here saw the work that Owen in particular was doing and offered him trips to come and see for himself what was happening in China. So this is how he and I were invited as special guests by Beijing. So in one of those visits, we wanted to see an educational facility, and they took us to this model of a place in Guangzhou where the students were coming from rural villages simply to learn English because the Communist Party in Beijing had declared that one of the platforms they are going to have, another being electronics, because that was the period around 1998 when the technology was coming into play. And English was one of their platforms. Every person in China, they had committed themselves, must be exposed to know your enemy, speak their language, and English was the international language. So
there was an objective, Rona, there was an objective behind it. It was not simply learning foreign languages for the sake of it.
Absolutely. It was, as you said, a part of an overall developmental plan that they stick to from one passage of sessions to another, so that they do not lose sight of the final goal, which is unlike us, because every time we have a new democracy, every 5 years, we are subject to throwing out clean any attempts at the old one and starting off with a brand new set. It cannot work. Democracy is not working for the West. But anyway, I don't want to talk politics.
Yeah.
Let me go back to China. So we were invited to China, and for 1 year, because they are very regulated in their, they just don't do carte blanche, come here and stay. And we were monitored because as foreign teachers. So, but we must have been doing something they liked, because each year, as we lost our fortunes in Trinidad, we had nothing more. Our sons were grown and graduated, so we might as well stay on. And this we did. Now, Frank asked about how we survived. We were so broke when we went to China. Some people didn't think so. They thought we went away with a whole lot of money, and oh my God, old talk, wasted hot air that we Trinidadians seem to enjoy. But when we went to China, it was sort of like, empty pockets. So we had to wait on the very first month's salary, which was equivalent to 5,000 renminbi, 5,000 TT, same. But because Owen and I put our 5,000, it was like we had an edge on the other foreign teachers, because we were a couple, as they call us, earning 10,000 TT a month. But because they're Chinese and the concept of the one rice bowl is a part of their philosophy, what happened was that we were given not only 2 beautiful apartments, don't worry, we entertained a lot, those Chinese students. So we had 2 apartments, but we were given food for a stipend. Every day we can eat at the cafeteria for a small fee, because it was subsidized for all the teachers. And every month, milk, sugar, eggs, whatever, cleaning, because that is the concept of communalism, communal living. You understand what I'm saying?
Yes.
So it was worth our while to stay there and enjoy this new culture. I call it, that was our university of a new culture. That is what it was. We learned so much. We didn't only teach, but we learned so much. Anyway, I think that more or less covers all the...
Yeah, so that we are winding down now. We just have a couple more minutes, and let me share it between Frank and Peter. Your closing thoughts and comments on what we've been talking about for the last hour plus. Frank, go ahead first.
Well, I think Rona has, to some extent, identified that there's such a thing as a Chinese philosophy of life. This is apart from political ideology per se. I don't know what Peter thinks of that, but I believe that we living in Trinidad, well, I have been here for the past 92 years, and I have a sense that we have a philosophy of life.
Mm-hmm. We do. We do.
That philosophy of life is shared by all of us. Of course, it is identifiable in the fact that we tend to want to laugh at everything, but that is a starting point, so that we are now to try to identify what is the philosophy of life, that, because at this point of my life, I am more excited for having been born in this country than ever before. Okay. Not politically, but philosophically.
All right. Peter, closing words from you, Peter.
Well, you want to mention a word which rang a bell with me. That word is the oneness of the Chinese nation being an influence, in the development of the country. Now, when I studied, managerial finance and corporation, whatever in those days, one of the elements of the study was what we call goal congruence. A company is necessary for a company to have what is called goal congruence, which essentially means all of the persons involved in the operation has a goal, and that goal is the corporate goal. Now, I could say very candidly, I believe that this country has not had a proper image of national goal congruence, meaning, as a nation, what it is we want for the country, what it is we want to become ourselves, given the challenges that now exist in this universal rat race that we are now seeing. And this national goal congruence issue is something where the government now has to come forward and inform all citizens of this country that we ain't going to go anywhere in life unless we can get together and we have a national goal, and whether it is production, whether we want Trinidad to become the best place in the world for party and set, nothing wrong with that, but we need to have some self-identification for the country to move forward. Because right now, I don't think people really know who they really are.
All right, Peter Morales, Frank Clark, and Rona Batiste, thank you very much for being with us and throwing out these ideas, giving us a perspective into the past and how people lived then, and projecting into the future. Peter talking about a national goal, Rona talking about the discipline, and so on, and Frank Clark saying that we have something here, but we need to perhaps build on it. We want to thank you very much for coming and talking with us this afternoon. Chalo, tomorrow we go back to the normal, I want to call it humdrum existence of talking about politics and the economy and how we move forward, how we're going to survive. We have a number of economists, Vanus James, we have Dave Siratan from the Institute of International Relations, we have Vashti, what's the last name, from the Trinidad and Tobago Chamber of Commerce, etc., to talk about the economy and how we go forward from here. So, Chalo, over to you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Tony, and thank you very much, everybody, for being here this afternoon.